Hello, Bible 12. Happy Star Wars Day. It has arrived. All right, so your warm-up is a pretty simple one in just one sentence in less than 10 words. What's the main purpose for dating? Hopefully you've done that already, and you're watching this screencast. One quick thing that I wanted to go over with you is the last portion of your marriage project. And you might be thinking, yeah, the lightning strike. But no, there is always one more part. It's an interview. Now, this doesn't go on your blog. So on your blog, you have 4 journals, 2 budgets, 1 lightning strike for a total of 7 different components. And that's what will go, or that will be all in your assessments category. It's your big final project. But then the final portion of this is the last 18 points of that project, which is this marriage project interview, because we want to see if your fictional marriage and your financial understanding lines up with reality. So here are the things that are required for this. 1, questions address elements explored in the project. Don't just like ask them random questions, but like ask things that actually have to do with like things that we covered, like what was the wedding like? How did you guys meet? Those sorts of things, because that's all part of it. How do you do your budgeting? I don't know, depending on, well, the next question kind of ties to this. The questions are worded considerately. So some like it might not be a good idea, depending on who you're interviewing, just to be like, hey, what's your credit score? Because they might not want to tell you that. So word your questions considerately so that way they can volunteer as much information as they want to. Also, questions should reflect sincere interests of the student. So meaning like ask questions that you're interested in, not just like I need to get a good grade on this. This category is turned into extra credit. Before it had to be someone who is not an immediate family member who's been married for more than 7 years. If you meet those criteria, you get 2 extra credit points. You can interview your parents because I understand that things are weird. So if you can like run a Zoom interview or something like that with someone who isn't a family member and has been married that long, you'll get 2 points extra credit on this. The interview, you need to ask at least 8 prepared and meaningful questions, and attach those questions to the bottom of your reflection. And then 2, you need to allow for rabbit trails and improvised follow-up questions. So instead of just being like, here's my question, oh, that's their answer, here's my question, that's their answer, here's my question. But like if they say something that like interests you, follow up with another question. And as you write your reflection, say, I asked about this, they said this, which made me wonder about blank. Your reflection needs to be 1 page, at least. It needs to explain your motives for asking your questions. It needs to connect information from the interview to content in the class, and it needs to include impact on personal expectations and preparation leading up to marriage. Meaning, like, after talking to them, I now feel like I understand this better, or I'm a little confused because this was different than that. Like, so basically explain how that interview affected you. And then if it is a Zoom interview with someone, clearly you can forge for them and put the interviewee name as long as they give you permission. And so that's the final portion. And this is going to be due Wednesday, not this Wednesday, the last Wednesday we have together, which is, I believe, May 13th. So that's that. If you have any questions, drop into that Q&A session at the end of class. So that's the marriage project interview. So you have that warm-up and there's an exit ticket that's based on everything else we're going to learn. So let's go learn those other everything else's. We did this already. Cool. Now, oftentimes what we are going to assume is that the main purpose for dating is finding a spouse. And if nothing else, then like maybe figuring out how to interact with people who could potentially be a spouse. But like usually there is some sort of end goal here. Now, if it's just to have fun, we can talk about like maybe some of the impact of what do you mean by to have fun, and how fun is it? Like how fun is heartbreak, I guess, if it's just to break up eventually. But we can dig into those things later. But first thing we need to do is cut through some of the cliches. So when some people say like, we need to date and so that way we can marry, we should find spouses. Like the way that we should go about finding a spouse is through the dating process. And in that process, we want to marry someone for love. We want to find the person that we can truly and deeply love and marry that person. The thing is, we've spent a lot of time parsing out what love actually means, and it can be kind of complicated. So Like, unfortunately, when people say, I need to find that person that I love deeply, what they mean is the person who, like, um, allows me to feel the highest level of dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, and oxytocin, right? So let's not just say cliches. So it can't just be like, okay, I'm going to marry for love. Well, like, what do you mean by that? Like, what does it mean that you're going to marry someone because you love them? Um, the issue, naturally, like as was evidenced in some of the research that we did, if it is about those feelings, if you no longer feel those feelings, do you still have a reason to be married, right? So maybe there's some other criteria that we should look for in a spouse. Also, there is this issue of like, I just need to find my soulmate. I need to find the one. Um, and I love the trust in the sovereignty of God that comes with this type of view, but I do think that it's a loaded statement that can backfire very, very easily, because if there is the one that is out there for each of us, then here's what happens is when you start to have troubles in your marriage, when things start falling apart and don't work out exactly like you wanted them to, then you start thinking the thought, maybe I didn't find the right one. Maybe there's another, the one. I'll tell you how to find the one. The one, right, your soulmate, the person that you were meant to be with, is the person that you say I do to, right? Like the person that you choose to marry, that's the one. So the danger of the one theology is that if we like think that the one is out there and they're like this predestined entity, then we can forever second guess ourselves. But instead, the one is the one that you marry. So how do we go about finding such a one? And so the way that we're going to approach this in class is we're going to go by negatives. We're going to say how not to find someone to marry. So tip number one, do not find a future spouse based on sex appeal. Meaning choosing a spouse based on their sexiness or trying to get yourself a spouse based on your own sexiness. There are two problems with this. One, sexiness is fleeting. Your sex appeal will eventually diminish, provided that you live long enough. And if you don't live long enough and you die, your sex appeal will definitely diminish because you're dead. So that's a problem. And the second is objectification, which we'll unpack. I believe I was a sophomore in Algebra 2, and there was a senior guy. His name was Peter. Peter, if you're out there, thanks for the advice. But he gave some advice that was like kind of controversial and not politically correct. And I think there's a nugget of truth in it, and we can throw out the rest of it. And the thing that he said was, look, if you're trying to find a wife, you just need to make sure she can cook and clean, because when they're 80, they all look the same. Now, the first chunk of that is definitely sexist, and we should throw that right out the window. However, I do think that he was onto a nugget of truth in the second half. Now, 80-year-old people don't all look the same, so all of my 80-year-old viewers, please do not be upset. But there is a nugget of truth in that if you're trying to find someone based off their sexiness, and you want to be married with them till the day you die, and you want to live a longer life, then eventually you're committing to being married to someone who has an expiration date on their relative sexiness. So, it's probably not the best way to choose a spouse. Now, the other thing, objectification, is when you objectify a person, you treat that person as an object rather than as a person. And so the follow-up question should be, what's an object? So an object is a thing that you can see and touch and that is not alive, or someone or something that makes you feel a specified emotion. Look at both of these definitions of objectification. This one, it's you can see and touch it, but you don't treat it as a living, breathing human being. And the second one is someone or something that makes you feel something. It's not about them, but it's about what you feel and what you're getting out of it. So objectification, when we get fixated on sex appeal, one, we're investing in a relationship that's based off of something that will have an expiration date and die someday. And we're also doing something that reduces that person from being a human soul to just being a body that looks good and does things for me. And I think that, like, you've probably been in our school long enough and had enough conversations about objectification and sexuality to know that, like, it's not good to objectify other humans. One, because we are created in God's image, and if we're all created in God's image, and we are God's prized possession, then we cannot treat human beings with souls like they're objects of entertainment, right? We talked about this in the beginning with like and love for the subhuman, and how we convert humans into subhuman beings. And so, one, we need to not objectify. However, there's a couple of different ways that objectification takes place. And so what we're going to do on Wednesdays, we're going to spend a lot of time unpacking two different ways that objectification happens. And unfortunately, the way that we're going to do this is through reading some articles written by Christians. And because of the way the world is, it is often, now this isn't always the case, it is often not men who are objectified, but the other way around. And so we are going to be reading articles written by two Christian women who have two differing views on what is objectification and what is modesty. Because I think that that needs to play into this conversation, because even if sex appeal is not the foundation for why a person chooses a spouse, oftentimes it's an ingredient in that whole cocktail somewhere. And so we need to figure out, okay, how does that part appropriately fit into this picture? And I think the heart of it is the idea of modesty. Now, modesty has been used in the past as something like to beat people over the head with, to make them feel bad about their bodies and the clothing that they wear. But then also sometimes people have knee-jerk reactions against it and are like, no, we need to liberate ourselves and, I don't know, be naked all the time, whatever it is. And I think that the two camps have something to learn from each other. And so that's why we're going to read two different articles. But today we're not going to read those two articles. We're going to read one article. And this article is satire. So for those of you who do not know what satire is the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. That topical issue is modesty. And it's a satirical piece about it, and it's called When Suits Become a Stumbling Block. What I want you to do is I want you to read that satirical piece and think about what is it that they are satiring. Now, fair warning, it's 15 pages, but it's mostly pictures because the pictures help explain what's going on in the article. So it's actually a fairly short article. It just feels long because you're scrolling a lot. It's called When Suits Become a Stumbling Block. So your exit ticket is two pieces. One, why is sex appeal a really bad foundation for finding a spouse? And two, what phenomenon in Christianity is the article When Suits Become a Stumbling Block critiquing? What is it satiring? What is it making fun of or poking at? Once you've done those two things, that's all we've got for class today. If you have questions about your projects, make sure you drop in the Q&A session in the last 15 minutes of class, which is at 12:30. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.